As we saw in part 1 and 2 of this series, BP and the supporting actors in this disaster engaged in lying, insider trading, reckless endangerment, intentional environmental destruction, government circumvention, all while avoiding prosecution and reaping massive profits. I want to take a moment to look at the $4.5 billion out-of-court settlement BP reached with the DOJ. That's right, Eric Holder. In 2010, Obama mandated that BP set up a $20 billion trust fund to compensate Gulf state residents affected by the disaster and for remediation efforts to restore the region, which we know from Act 1 and 2 were never part of the plan. Remediation in this sense is synonymous with cover-up. According to BP's own investor relations report for third quarter 2012, BP estimated and set aside, at least on paper, $31.8 billion for damages as a result of the spill. In addition, according to their own report, BP had $19.1 billion in the Obama-mandated set-aside fund, of which only $8.2 billion had been paid out to date. Yet, BP reaches an out-of-court settlement with Eric Holder for a mere $4.5 billion. Case closed. Interestingly enough, all but $725 million of the settlement agreed to behind closed doors is directed to go towards government entities who, as we saw, were just as culpable in this disaster as BP. Let's look at the breakdown. $2.4 billion is to go to the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, government, a Rockefeller fund, synonymous. $35 million is to go to the National Academy of Sciences, or Rockefeller University. $1 billion is to go to the Coast Guard, government. And $525 million is set aside to go to the Securities and Exchange Commission. What? That's right. The SEC claimed that due to BP's misleading reporting on this disaster, the SEC had inadvertently misled its own investors and therefore was entitled to damages. Not its investors, but the SEC. And by the way, we might as well lump the SEC in with government as well. That leaves the total $4.5 billion settlement, of which $4.275 billion is to be totally directed to government or government-associated entities, leaving only $725 million to be unallocated, or we would hope to go towards the victims of this disaster in the Gulf Coast. Now let's look at the destruction phases in parts 1 and 2. And how they will soon render this entire area uninhabitable, and how this may bode well for the megalithic energy conglomerates, specifically the oil and gas industry. First, let's look at fracking, or hydraulic fracturing, a process used to extract natural gas from shale beds found in the underlying geological composition of a specific area or region. Prior to the BP disaster in 2008, 1,060 wells have been fracked in Louisiana. Since the disaster, another 930 fracking wells have been permitted and at our different stages of drilling. That is approximately an 88% increase in drilling permits or leases in this area since the BP disaster over a period of about 2 years. We saw in Act 2 how the fracturing of the subsea floor as a result of deep water drilling in the Gulf has caused naturally occurring cracks to open up, creating massive seeps in the entire area. The result of this is that enormous amounts of oil, methane, benzene, and other volatile organic compounds are accumulating in the Gulf. as well as in the aquatic life and in the air, and with no way of stopping or remediating this process. Fracking requires roughly 5.7 million gallons of water per well, water that can be used for irrigation and human consumption. Apply that figure to the additional 930 wells that have been permitted since 2010, and you can see how this will severely impact the water supply in Louisiana. The water is combined with chemicals, sand, and gel-type lubricants that are then injected under pressure of about 1500 psi into the well bore. Since the fluids used in fracking are a trade secret, the oil and gas producers are not required to inform the people what they are pumping into the ground. And thanks to the Halliburton loophole, fracking processes, including chemicals they're injecting into the ground and the wastewater byproduct coming out of the ground, are exempt from the Safe Water Drinking Act of 1974, as well as from EPA regulations under Subtitle C of the Energy Policy Act of 2005, or the Halliburton loophole. It is important to note that due to the depths of these wells, some of them in excess of 1 mile, the well bores must pass through aquifers or clean water tables, and a fraccident or fracturing accident of one of these well bores could result in the contamination of entire aquifers, thus decimating an entire water resource for plants, livestock, and human consumption in a particular area or region. In addition to the carcinogenic chemicals, including benzene and toluene, recovered from independent testing of water from these wells, high levels of radioactive material releases, specifically radium and uranium, have also been identified in and around fracking locations. In many instances, these levels range from 250 to over 1,500 times the federal limit for environmental release. And what is the EPA or NRC saying on this matter? Absolutely nothing. So, what are they doing with all this wastewater being created? Well, in some cases, it's being hauled off to local sewage treatment plants, which were never designed to handle level 1 VOCs or radioactive materials. In addition, at roughly 6 million gallons of water per well, and let's just look at the 930 additional wells for now and disregard the 1,000 plus wells already in production, you're looking at about 5.6 billion gallons of highly contaminated wastewater as a result of fracking to be pumped through and on top of the processing capacity of these wastewater treatment plants. So, where are they putting it? My guess is right back into the ground. Surface water sources such as rivers, streams, and lakes, which will eventually end up in the air and bioaccumulate in plants, animals, and aquatic life, as well as persistently poisoning people in the region by way of exposure, inhalation, and/or ingestion. I think you get the picture. Second, we'll look at the use of naturally occurring salt domes for the storage of volatile gas, oil, and a host of other hazardous materials. As I'm sure many of you are already aware of the sinkhole in Bayou Corn, which is the result of the collapse of a gas storage cavern leased by Texas Brine, located in the Napoleonville Salt Dome. The official position being taken by Texas Brine is that the integrity of the cavern was compromised due to a series of naturally occurring earthquakes in the area of the salt. Let's look at this explanation. We know from research that after the injection process of a fracking well ceases, the act of pumping in highly pressurized water and chemicals into the well bore that this is immediately followed by small quakes in the surrounding area. We know this because above each of these cavern storage facilities are localized seismic monitors to measure such activity. So it is arguable that the quakes Texas Brine alludes to are natural, but that they are the direct result of fracking activity in the area. Over 50 caverns have been born out of the Napoleonville salt dome, leaving it with the appearance and the integrity of Swiss cheese. What exactly is being stored in these caverns? Well, first off, these caverns are not only used for storage, they are also used as disposal facilities for highly volatile organic contaminants such as chemical waste, military ordnance, and spent nuclear waste materials. These man-made and naturally occurring salt caverns provide storage for light hydrocarbons such as propane, butane, ethane, ethylene, natural gas, and oil and gas, which are otherwise referred to as strategic petroleum reserves, or SPRs. These are also used to store other products coming from refineries and the natural gas extraction that are transported and stored as liquids. So how much of this combustible gas and liquids is being stored in these caverns in Louisiana? According to a report put out by the EIA, or Energy Information Administration, for 2007 to 2008, this capacity stood at 48 billion cubic feet. And you can bet, with the increase in fracking leases, that number is much higher today. So, why use salt domes? Quite simply, because it's cheap, and profit is the name of the game. In addition, after these caverns are borne out, the salt itself provides a self-sealing type of containment vessel. Salt domes have an unstable tensile strength baseline, and it is affected adversely by increases in temperature, and the USGS was well aware of this, as were the oil drilling companies and industries in 1983. Drilling, injection, and extraction from these formations generates heat, lots of it, up to 140 degrees Celsius in the storage cavern. Also, the rock-like salt material comprising these domes and caverns have a brittle aspect to them, in that they can perform under vertical pressure under normal conditions, but they are less likely to hold up under horizontal pressures such as earthquakes, thus losing structural integrity. Kind of like taking a piece of coal or shale. If you try and squeeze it or bend break it, it's hard as a rock, but if you strike it in a certain way, it shatters. The practice of boring out storage caverns combined with regional fracking has led to the degradation of the Napoleonville salt dome. And I think we can accurately conclude that this is the primary cause of the Bayou Corn sinkhole. Further degradation of other storage caverns in other salt domes is probably imminent, given the regional disturbance of the underlying geology in that area by drilling, extraction, and storage methods we've discussed, which have led to increased seismic activity. Third, let's look at how the use of Cynthia plays into this whole depopulation scenario for the Gulf and Louisiana region. For those of you who are not familiar with Cynthia, let's do a brief overview. Cynthia is a genetically engineered synthetic bacteria. It was designed to seek out and consume carbon-based materials, specifically hydrocarbons or oil, supposedly to aid in oil spill remediation. It was developed by Dr. Craig Venter, who founded Synthetic Genomics. And there's an interesting relationship here as well that we'll take a look at in a minute. Venter developed Cynthia by recovering the DNA from subsurface hydrocarbon substrates, biological organisms in crude oil, and then applying DNA sequence methods, which he developed in a lab on a computer. What this means is that they took the DNA from naturally occurring underground crude oil reservoir microbial cells, such as bacteria or viruses, and cultivated them into a lab to identify, isolate, and interpret their chemical and genetic properties. Additional sequencing methods beyond the original identity and isolation stages were also carried out to increase the voracity and aggression of this synthetically developed bacteria. Although the mainstream media proclaims this technology was developed to assist in spill remediation, based on what I can tell, it was not, and here's why. Cynthia was developed and funded as part of a microbial enhanced oil recovery, or MEOR. It was created to generate additional petroleum production from an oil reservoir. Microorganisms are introduced into oil wells to produce byproducts which help propel oil out of the well. Because these processes help to mobilize oil and assist oil flow, they allow a greater amount of oil to be recovered from the well. MEOR is a direct application of biotechnology. It uses biological materials such as bacteria, microorganisms, and the byproducts of their metabolism to assist the movement of oil out of a well. The microorganisms can be applied to entire oil reservoirs where they grow between the oil and the well's rock surface to enhance oil recovery in the following ways. It produces a biosurfactant. This biosurfactant is a slippery substance that these organisms create when they metabolize the oil. Biosurfactants act like slippery detergents, helping the oil move freely away from rocks and crevices, making it easier to extract. Second, Cynthia produces carbon dioxide gas as a byproduct of its metabolism process. Over time, this gas accumulates and displaces the oil, forcing it up and out of the ground. And number 3, last but not least, Cynthia reduces oil viscosity. By breaking down the molecular structure of crude oil, it makes it more fluid and easier to recover. This last characteristic was the only property of Cynthia that the mainstream media focused on to present the illusion that Cynthia was being used for spill remediation. So, who funded Venter and synthetic genomics? BP. Since BP was paying for genetic research to increase oil well flow and production since 2007, they needed to apply or test this newly created microorganism and did it at the oil reservoir located at their Macondo Block 252 lease in the Gulf of Mexico. According to the Materials Management Service application submitted by BP, there were to be 2 exploration, not production, wells drilled and capped, and these were designated as wells A and B. Exploration wells are commonly used to inject naturally occurring microbial enhanced oil recovery microorganisms and their nutrients into an oil reservoir for increased present and future production. The first exploration well had been partially drilled by Transocean in October of 2009. But their Marianas semi-submersible drilling rig was damaged by Hurricane Ida and was removed for repairs in late November of 2009. In February of 2010, the Deepwater Horizon semi-submersible rig commenced exploration drilling to complete the unfinished drilling operation of the Marianas rig. Several days later, BP informed the Materials Management Service that they were experiencing uncontrollable bursts of gas and large cracks at the base of the well. That was the reason they filed for and were granted a permit to abandon and cap the well that very same day. Cynthia was being used in the Gulf prior to the disaster in April of 2010, and BP continued using it months after the incident under the guise of environmental remediation. Cynthia is an artificial life form, a bioengineered, self-replicating bacteria. Cynthia is a derivative of the gamma proteobacteria class. Although this class, with regard to natural occurring species of bacteria in the ocean, needs salt to thrive, Cynthia does not. In other words, it can thrive inland in freshwater lakes and streams as well. A number of significant pathogens that belong to this class include Salmonella, which causes enteritis and typhoid fever; Yersinia pestis, which causes plague; Vibrio cholerae, or cholera; Pseudomonas aeruginosa, or lung infection and pneumonia; Escherichia coli, or E. coli. It is important to note that the naturally occurring bacteria, as well as Cynthia, thrive in a more iron-rich environment, which the Gulf and land-based freshwater supplies are not. So, why have they been finding increased levels, unnatural levels, of iron in the Gulf and inland waterways, and in the rain falling in this entire region? Because it's being put there. Copper is one of the main ingredients of Corexit 9500. You remember in Act 2 we discussed bioaccumulation? Well, this is an artificial life form that is now bioaccumulating at the very base of the food chain, and it is mutating, and they cannot control it. Dr. Venter is nothing more than a modern-day Frankenstein or Dr. Moreau. One of his goals, not specifically related to this video, is to create artificial life forms that will suck CO2, which the global warming terrorists call a pollutant, out of the air. I can't imagine anything going terribly wrong with that, can you? Here's some of the ongoing symptoms people in the Gulf have been afflicted with, and that doctors are unable to identify the cause of. Nausea, sore throat, headaches, lesions, ulceration, bleeding from nose and ears, bleeding from the rectum, digestive problems, including diarrhea and internal bleeding, and respiratory depression, including coughing up brown and white foam, vomiting, yet these people undergo standard medical tests for viral or bacterial infection. And these tests come back negative. Not surprising, because there is no DNA signature for Cynthia in the bacterial or viral databases, as it was developed in a lab, and it is 100% resistant to all known antibiotics. Once infected, there is no cure. No worries though, synthetic genomics is going into the vaccine business. Could this be one of the causes for the mass fish die-offs in the region and unexplained bird deaths over the past couple of years? Whatever is going on in the Gulf, to whatever extent, it is affecting the sea, the water, the land, the water sources, and all life that depends on it. Fourth, as we reviewed in Act 1, since Katrina, the government has in place aggressive plans to buy out or otherwise persuade residents of Louisiana to permanently relocate under the guise of coastal restoration programs. In 2007-2008, the Corps of Engineers had a $1.2 billion buyout program to buy out 3,000 residential homes in the Gulf coastal region. Since then, federal agencies and environmentalists have concluded that climate change has increased and the threat of further devastation and continued rebuilding of this region makes no sense. To be included in the overall plan is $40 billion to be spent on the Mississippi coast. Part of this would be for a voluntary buyout of 17,000 homes in Mississippi, particularly in the Bay St. Louis area east of New Orleans, and the Corps is likely to extend the plan to New Orleans and Louisiana. It's going to play out like this. The government isn't going to assist you to rebuild, but they will give you money to permanently relocate, regional depopulation, and strategic relocation. In a statement by Susan Reese, the relocation project director of the Corps, she stated to The Guardian that the whole concept of trying to remove people and properties from the coast is very, very challenging. Her observation is reflected by Louisiana Congressman Gene Taylor, who plans on staying in his home in Bay St. Louis, stating, "There is no public support for this program, no will for it, and no money for it in the private sector." Fifth, there have been a rash of explosions occurring during the past couple of months throughout this region that can't be explained, or are unnatural, or just they're not normal. For example, May 21st, the plant explosion in Port Allen, Louisiana. On October 16th, the Minden Munitions Depot explosion, which I covered in one of my videos, one of two within a month at a munitions depot in Louisiana. Channel 2 News reported an East Texas gas line explosion. 2 people were taken to LSU Hospital. No date was given on the report, strangely enough, but I believe it was in late October. October 12th, natural gas explosion in Castle Rock, Colorado. October 30th, booms and fireballs seen over the skies in Tennessee, Alabama, and Louisiana. November 7th, gas explosion in Shelby County, Indiana. November 9th through 16th, 4 more explosions in Indiana. November 16th, strange explosion levels several blocks in the Indianapolis area. And on November 16th, the Gulf oil rig explosion off the coast of Louisiana. The point is, there have been a lot of explosions, not just in Louisiana, but several others occurring along the New Madrid fault line all the way up to Illinois. Louisiana, and to a certain degree the surrounding region, is being geologically destabilized by fracking, by the use of salt domes as storage and disposal units, by the use of, by the explosion activity, and by the ongoing fracturing of the Gulf floor we discussed in Act 1. Just a side note regarding large amounts of methane being detected in the air and water in the Louisiana Gulf Coast, a new organism, or a new gene, was discovered by MIT in the bacteria in the Gulf Coast that enables it to survive in a dormant state in a completely oxygen-deprived environment. When a food source, or in this case methane, is detected, they reanimate, they thrive and multiply. Scientists at MIT are baffled as they don't know where this gene came from. Could this be a mutated form of Cynthia, which was originally created to feed off oil? In conclusion, we see through the planning, misdirection, and complete lack of accountability, BP and its supporting actors and subsidiary companies, government, and the global agenda are in the process of rendering the Gulf and coastal regions uninhabitable. This is what we know. The BP settlement reached with Eric Holder behind closed doors is a joke. The 4.5 plus the 8.2 billion they claim to have already point out still leaves them with 7.3 of the 20 billion Obama set aside mandate in their coffers, a slush fund. Since number 2, since the BP disaster, over 930 additional fracking wells have been permitted in Louisiana for a total of over 2,100 wells to date. As more and more mineral rights are being auctioned off from private and public lands, I was surprised to learn that this money made from oil and gas produced from these wells by the Department of Natural Resources goes right back into a fund to purchase more state and private mineral rights. Do you see how once the profits go into the machine, they stay in the machine? The fracking, number 3, the fracking process is not only polluting the ground and air, it is also diminishing finite supplies of fresh water. And thanks to the Cheney loophole in the Safe Water Drinking Act of 2005, which was supposed to protect us and the environment from industry poisoning us, corporations like BP, Halliburton, Exxon, and Anadarko are free to pump whatever they want into the environment. No regulations, no oversight, no repercussions for them. Number 4, the insane practice of compromising salt domes for storage of oil and gas, along with the use of these caverns for the disposal of hazardous materials and radioactive waste, has weakened the entire geological infrastructure of the region, which, not to mention, the New Madrid Fault runs through. Propaganda machine would have us believe that the instability in the region is a result of naturally occurring earth changes. They are not. Although there is no argument that significant earth changes are occurring, the frequency and intensity is being or could be being exacerbated by these activities. Increased seismic activity has been directly linked to fracking and the destabilization of the Gulf floor, which is also resulting in the sinking of the Gulf coastal region. Sea levels are not rising due to erosion. They're rising because the entire area that sits on the Gulf floor is sinking. And the rash of explosions are not due to earth changes per se. They are more likely due to releases of methane and other volatile gases venting up through the land in these areas. Number 6. BP, along with help from synthetic genomics, turned the entire Gulf of Mexico and surrounding states into a giant petri dish. Without conducting proper studies or a way to control it, Cynthia, an artificial life form, was dumped into the Gulf and sprayed from the air, not to assist in remediation, but to increase the amount of oil already in the Gulf as a result of the 2010 disaster. Along with Corexit, this bacteria or virus has been linked to crop destruction, untreatable illness, and death of livestock, fish die-offs, and a host of human ailments that can't be diagnosed or treated with conventional medicine. The Gulf Blue Plague, if you will, brought to you by the psychopaths at BP and Synthetic Genomics. This is a method of depopulation, one of many. The Army Corps, number 7, the Army Corps of Engineers, in conjunction with FEMA, are using federal money, our money, for the strategic relocation of homeowners from the coastal areas of Louisiana and Mississippi to permanently leave these areas. This is selective depopulation. Number 8, if they wreck the entire ecology of this region, and whether by design or default the region is depopulated, they are free to turn it into a giant extraction and refining facility. They won't have to bother with costly subterranean drilling. All they'll have to do is suck up those billions of barrels of oil accumulating on the Gulf floor. Just imagine a vast area entirely free of regulations, because that region will soon be devoid of all life. A utopia for the oil and gas industry, a nightmare for humanity, and a major score for the global agenda. Number 9. BP, in conjunction with synthetic genomics, are entering into the field of vaccines. That's right. Imagine a synthetic life form of viral, self-replicating bacteria. They created, they patented, and they potentially hold the only key to a cure or annihilation. Time is running out. These psychopaths are out of control and they need to be stopped. And it's important to note that BP isn't the only culprit involved with synthetic genomics in the development of artificial life forms for MEOR. Exxon, as well as the top 5 global oil producers, are also involved, as well as Anadarko locally. Please leave your comments for discussion below. Thank you for watching, and please share these videos. This information needs to get out so that people wake up.